Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled Ambulance. Let's get straight into the storyline. The story begins by showing a man named Will Sharp, who is contacting the insurance company to ask for help getting health insurance. Currently, he really needs a large amount of money for cancer surgery suffered by his wife. However, the insurance company refused to help him because Will is now a veteran. It is known that Will is a retired United States military soldier. His wife, Amy Sharp, is also holding their child. Will, not wanting to disappoint Amy, was forced to lie and say they would get the insurance soon.
I lose faith in this world on a daily basis. Not in you, though.
After that, Will said goodbye to Amy because he had a job interview. On the other hand, a female medic named Cam and her colleague, a man named Scott, were seen driving an ambulance to the scene of an accident in downtown Los Angeles.
2 minutes out, en route.
PD at scene, be advised, child impaled, critical.
Arriving at the location, Cam immediately got out to provide assistance. As it turned out, the victim was a little girl who was trapped in the car and in pain from being punctured by an iron fence. There, Cam and the other officers were careful when evacuating.
Go.
After successfully removing the little girl, they immediately took her to the hospital for more serious treatment. Meanwhile, Will apparently did not attend a job interview, but went to a luxury car showroom to meet with the owner of the showroom, who is also his adopted brother, Danny Sharp. There, Will intends to borrow some money from Danny for his wife's surgery. However, in the middle of their conversation, some of Danny's members suddenly arrived carrying a truck filled with weapons. Seeing this, Will was surprised because he did not expect Danny to be still running his criminal profession as a robber. Danny says that he is currently planning to rob a federal bank that holds $32 million in cash, and he needs Will to join the mission. Initially, Will declined the offer because he didn't want to break the law. However, as Danny continues to persuade and mentions that the robbery can be used for his wife's surgery, Will, who desperately needs the money, finally agrees to Danny's plan. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Los Angeles police officers Zach and Mark are patrolling while talking about a woman Zach likes. The woman's name is Kim, and she works as a teller at a federal bank in Los Angeles. Mark, who wants to help Zach confess his feelings, immediately turns the car around and heads for the bank. Meanwhile, the truck driven by Will, Danny, and their members is heading towards the bank, their target. In the truck, the driver, Randazzo, says they are close to the bank, so Danny and his members immediately prepare.
I'm gonna rock this today. Get ready to roll, boys!
But without them knowing, when they arrived at the parking lot, a mysterious man was seen watching their arrival. As it turns out, the mysterious man outside the building is an SIS special agent who is undercover to investigate the movements of Danny and his members. One of the agents contacted their superior, Captain Monroe, to ask for permission to make an arrest. However, Captain Monroe did not allow it for fear that it would cause bloodshed in the city center. Captain Monroe ordered his men to monitor and wait until he arrived. Meanwhile, Zach, who wants to enter the bank, is confused because he finds the door locked. Disguised as a bank manager, Danny approaches him and argues that the bank is having system problems, so the bank is temporarily closed. However, Zach insisted on going in because he had something important to do with one of the tellers. Finally, Danny gave Zach 20 minutes.
Yeah, that was really cute.
Well, I'm sure Big Bob can help you.
Hi. Hello.
Give me a visitor. Make it quick.
This is gonna sound a little crazy.
While inside the bank, Zach immediately expressed his feelings to Kim and asked her for a date. However, Kim, who looked very distressed, made Zach suspicious. Danny, who felt that his cover had been blown, immediately pointed a gun at Zach and asked him to wave his hand so that his colleagues outside would not be suspicious.
Give me a big smile and wave at your partner. I need you to nod if you understand, officer. There you go. Yeah, there you go.
Danny's members had already obtained the money in another room and immediately put it in a bag.
My wife's gonna be very happy.
Meanwhile, the truck Randazzo is driving suddenly breaks down in front of the bank. Mark, who was there, immediately approached Randazzo's truck. Mark, who didn't realize Randazzo was part of a gang of robbers, helped fix the truck. After Randazzo's truck started again, Mark saw his colleague in danger, so he immediately gave help and there was a shootout. During the shootout, the SIS agents, previously only monitoring, came out to help Mark. On the other hand, Danny and Will, who were still holding Zach hostage, managed to escape to the car park. However, Zach tries to fight back, so Will accidentally shoots Zach, which makes him lie down. After that, Danny invites Will to leave immediately, leaving Zach in a critical condition. When they got outside, they were surprised by the police surrounding the place from all directions. At the same time, Cam and Scott were seen moving closer to the scene. Meanwhile, the police, who managed to immobilize all of Danny's men, began to enter the building. On the other hand, Mark, who saw Zach in a dying condition, immediately contacted the medical team to provide help. Shortly after that, Cam and Scott arrived and immediately provided first aid so that Zach survived until arriving at the nearest hospital.
I'm gonna be helping you, okay?
However, Danny and Will saw it when the ambulance was about to leave, then intercepted and hijacked it.
Get out! Back up.
What do you want?
Cam, we can shoot our way out of this?
But at the exit, the police were waiting. Will, whose face has not been recognized by the police, poses as a medic. At the same time, Danny threatens Cam to follow his orders so that the police don't get suspicious.
A cop shot. We gotta go. Move your cars. We gotta get him to the hospital. Move.
All right, let's go. Let's get out of here. Hey, Will. We got through it.
Inside the building, Mark finds an injured Scott. Scott tells him that the robbers have hijacked the ambulance. Mark immediately reported to all police members to track down the ambulance. On the way, Will removes the GPS device from the ambulance, making it difficult for the police to track it.
Whoa! What the hell?
I'm screwed.
Yeah, shit.
As Danny and Will focus on avoiding the surveillance of the police helicopter, Cam suddenly tries to fight back to escape. However, Danny thwarts his action, coming out and pointing his gun at Cam.
Stop it!
Zach's worsening condition makes Cam return to the ambulance to help.
Just drive through.
On the other hand, Captain Monroe has arrived at the scene. He promised Mark that he would immediately save his colleague from the robbers. At the same time, Captain Monroe's men received a report from the air patrol team that the ambulance had been tracked and was still in the city center. Hearing the report, Captain Monroe immediately ordered all his men to give chase. Elsewhere, an FBI agent named Anson was discussing the assignment of special agents to all federal banks in downtown Los Angeles. Not long after, he received news of a major robbery at one of the federal banks in the city center. Meanwhile, a tactical team from headquarters had arrived at the scene to assist Captain Monroe and his men in this mission. A female officer named Zaga was assigned to monitor the robbers' movements through cameras linked to the air patrol team.
Target is proceeding down Broadway.
Have all units respond southbound on Broadway.
Captain Monroe then ordered the cyber team at headquarters to hack into all the communication devices used by the robbers, with the help of satellites and advanced technology that made it easier for the police to track the path the robbers would take. Inside the ambulance, Danny is surprised to see that the police have tracked their route. Will, an expert at driving, immediately accelerates the ambulance, leading to a chase.
Whoa, easy, easy. Come on.
Amid the chase, Danny plans to use several similar ambulances to outwit the police. Danny then contacts a high-profile mafia boss named Poppy, who used to work with his father. Danny asks Poppy to have his men steal several ambulances in the city center and take them under a flyover bridge. In return, Danny offers $8 million. Hearing the huge sum, Poppy agrees and sends his son, Roberto, to help Danny. After that, Danny also contacted his subordinate, Castro, and asked him to immediately go under the flyover bridge with an atomizer and blue paint. On the other hand, Anson, who was assisting the police in this pursuit, received the personal data of the suspects. Anson was shocked to learn that his target was his old college friend, Danny Sharp. Meanwhile, Roberto and his men are preparing a car with heavy weapons to help Danny. On the police side, Captain Monroe managed to contact Danny via satellite phone and asked him to stop and release the 2 hostages they were carrying. However, Danny refused the request. Danny said that if the police continued to chase him, then he would kill the 2 hostages.
We're gonna trap him here.
During this chase, Mark followed the ambulance to the convention center building.
We're going into the convention center.
At that moment, Mark was surprised to see Captain Monroe's dog in his car. Hearing the sound of his beloved dog in danger, Captain Monroe immediately asked all his members to stop the chase.
We can talk.
After things started to calm down, Cam saw blood pouring out of Zach's body. There, Cam tells Danny that Zach's condition is getting critical and must be operated on immediately to remove the bullet lodged in his body. However, because Cam is only an ambulance officer, she also contacts several doctors of her acquaintance to guide her step by step when performing surgery. Will, who had been a medic in the military, asked Danny to take his place driving so that he could assist Cam during the operation.
The skin.
Skin is open.
Put both of your hands in the wound, and I need you to spread the muscle apart.
However, their communication was cut off in the middle of the operation, causing Cam and Will to panic. Luckily, even though Zach's spleen was ruptured, they both managed to save him and remove the bullet from inside Zach's stomach. Seeing Cam's bravery made Will sympathetic, and he promised to save her from all this.
I'm gonna get you out of this.
On the other hand, Roberto called Danny to tell him that he and his members were preparing to head to the location. Meanwhile, Captain Monroe, worried about Zach's life, received news from the surgeon who had previously guided Cam. He said that during the operation, Zach's spleen ruptured and the video call was cut off, so there was a high probability that Zach would not survive. Hearing the news made Captain Monroe very angry, so he ordered all his members to take positions and attack the robbers.
This might be our last chance.
No more wait. Wait broke the wagon. D-Team, that's a green light.
Hey, you gotta turn around.
In the ambulance, Cam received a phone call from Anson. Anson asked Cam to take cover there because the snipers would attack them. Hearing the snipers, Cam told Will and Danny to get out of the way. Because of this incident, Danny becomes very angry and threatens Captain Monroe. If they still dare to mess around, then he will not hesitate to kill Zach and Cam.
Bullshit! You don't think I'm gonna hurt anyone, do you?
After that, there was a small commotion when Danny fired his gun at Cam.
You need to know! Fire!
Easy.
Do it again. All right.
Do it again.
While they were fighting, Anson tried to contact Will to negotiate. However, annoyed by Anson's words, Will switched off his phone call and continued.
That's my brother.
When things started to calm down, Will told Cam that he was actually forced to rob to pay for his wife's cancer surgery. If the government disbursed the insurance money he was entitled to at that time, he would not have wanted to commit a crime like this.
That's why you're robbing banks.
Meanwhile, Castro was seen preparing his spray paint at the location they had determined. At the same time, Roberto and his members brought several ambulances there. Having managed to get some distance from the police, they eventually arrived under the bridge. There, Danny asks Castro to paint the ambulance as soon as possible. At the same time, Roberto and his men have also prepared an ambulance that has been fitted with an explosive device. On the other hand, Captain Monroe, who already knew Danny's position was 3 blocks from the place, ordered his members to surround and close all access to the exit they would later pass through. Before starting the action, Danny asks Will to leave immediately because he has given Will the money he needs. However, Will refused and said, whatever happens, he won't leave his brother. Seeing several ambulances coming out from under the bridge made Captain Monroe feel like he was being played. Here, Captain Monroe immediately asked his men to chase the ambulances one by one.
Whoa, all them guns for real?
As a result of this incident, Captain Monroe died after being shot in the chest. Meanwhile, Mark, who saw Roberto trying to escape, immediately chased and managed to catch him. On the other hand, Poppy, who saw the news about his son's death on television, became very angry. Long story short, after successfully outwitting the police, their ambulance finally arrives at Poppy's secret headquarters. At that moment, Will asked Cam to stay in the car. Once inside, Danny gave the reward money to Poppy and expressed his condolences for the death of his son, Roberto. However, Poppy did not accept because the $8 million was not worth the life of his son, who was shot dead by the police. Therefore, Poppy asked them to hand over the 2 hostages for him to kill because, for him, life must be paid with life. Hearing this, Will immediately refused because he had promised to save Cam and Zach.
Strong choice. Cornelius.
Say that he's my pretend brother? He's my real brother!
Seeing that his brother was shot, Danny panicked and then immediately left there to take Will to the hospital. However, it turns out that the police know their whereabouts and return to the chase. In the ambulance, while Cam is trying to treat the gunshot wound in Will's shoulder, Will, who is still conscious, leaves some of the money from his robbery to Cam to be given to his wife. In the end, their ambulance arrived at the hospital. The police surrounded them from all directions. Meanwhile, when Danny saw Will's unconscious state, he was surprised by the police gun in the ambulance, so he thought it was Zach who had shot Will.
Cop's gun, this is a Glock. Is this your gun? You shot him!
No.
There, Cam confessed that she was the one who had shot Will because, at that time, she thought Will was Poppy's man. Hearing this explanation makes Danny very angry, and he plans to invite Cam to die with him in front of the police who are surrounding them. However, when Danny opened the ambulance door while pointing a gun at Cam's head, suddenly, a surprising thing happened. Seeing his brother dead made Will so sad and regretful. Will was forced to kill his own brother to stop all the crimes committed by Danny. From a distance, Will's wife was seen arriving there. She immediately cried hysterically, calling her husband's name. Hearing the scream, Cam then asked Mark to immediately save Will. At first, Mark refuses, but after Cam explains that Will has saved Zach's life, Mark finally wants to help him. After that, Cam approached Will's wife to calm her down. Then, before leaving, Cam secretly put the money deposited from Will into his wife's baby carriage.